Chapter 12 covers the spinal cord, spinal nerves, and spinal reflexes. The spinal cord can function independently from the brain. This chapter is on the spinal cord. Chapter 13 is on the brain, and you can see that both of them have sensory receptors that will bring in sensory input. And in this case, in the chapter 12, we're dealing just with the spinal cord, and this is where reflex centers lie. And then from the reflex, there would be motor output over spinal nerves. The effectors, as always, are muscles, glands, or adipose tissue. A reflex is a rapid automatic response triggered by a specific stimuli. We're born with these reflexes. Newborns have reflexes that they grow out of. For example, the startle reflex or the suckling reflex. Spinal reflexes are controlled in the spinal cord, and they function without input from the brain. We have to learn the structure of the spinal cord. Now here is a cross-section. You'll notice that there is a butterfly of gray matter that is deep to the outer white matter. The spinal cord ends at L1, L2. The spinal cord has 31 segments, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. The cone-shaped end of the spinal cord is at L1, L2, and that is called conus medullaris. Terminal threads from the tip of the conus medullaris travel down to S2, providing longitudinal support to the spinal cord, and that's called filum terminale. The cauda equina is called this because it resembles a horse's tail, but the anterior and posterior roots of the spinal segments are extended. So this consists of the anterior and posterior roots of the spinal segments L2 to S5 and the filum terminale. In naming the spinal nerves, they are designated by the region and number. C1 runs above the first cervical vertebrae, C8 below the 7th cervical vertebrae, but all others are named for vertebrae above them. For example, T1 is located below the first thoracic vertebrae. Back to the cross-section, the white matter is superficial to the gray matter. The white matter consists of myelinated and some unmyelinated axons. Gray matter is unmyelinated axons and cell bodies and neuroglia. And in the center is this central canal, and that contains cerebral spinal fluid, CSF. More detail, there is a deep anterior median fissure on the anterior edge, so you've got to be able to recognize the spinal cord right side up. You'll notice the butterfly is right side up, and you'll notice this ganglion here on the posterior surface. So the anterior surface and the posterior median sulcus. The spinal nerve, so here's our spinal nerve here. It contains axons of both sensory and motor neurons. The anterior root contains axons for motor neurons, and the posterior root contains axons for sensory neurons. This posterior root ganglion contains the cell bodies of the sensory neurons. What is the cauda equina composed of? Ventral and dorsal roots. Which region of the spinal cord has more spinal nerve pairs than the corresponding number of vertebrae? Cervical. To avoid spinal cord damage when a lumbar puncture is performed, what region of the spinal cord is involved? Cauda equina. What is present within the dorsal root ganglion, giving it a swollen appearance? cell bodies.